Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are joining. We're so thrilled to have y'all with us. My name is Lena Moffitt. I'm the Executive Director of Evergreen Action. I use she, her pronouns, and we're really thrilled to have you here with us today to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the benefits and funds available to tribes and to Indigenous communities. I am so excited to have this incredible set of panelists and leaders with us here today, and we're going to dive right in and go ahead and get started. We have a lot of details to share with you all today. We want this to be as useful as possible. We're going to start slinging information at you, but before we do that, let me introduce this incredible host of leaders and friends that we have here to talk about the programs within the IRA. So first and foremost, I mentioned I'm Lena Moffitt. I'm the Executive Director of Evergreen Action, she, her pronouns. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., the land of the Piscataway and Anacostan people. Thank you again for beaming in. We had hundreds of people sign up for this. I think it goes to show how much interest there is in making sure that these resources from the biggest investment that the United States has ever made in climate action make it into the hands of communities that need them most. So with us today to talk about that and exactly how we can do that, I have this incredible host of leaders with us. So first, I'd love to introduce my friend Jade Begay, who is Director of Policy and Advocacy at Indian Collective. She's a citizen of Tesuque Pueblo and is also Dene and Southern Youth. Jade works at the intersections of storytelling, narrative strategy, climate and environmental justice, and Indigenous rights policy, both at the domestic and international level. At NDN, she leads programs and projects that elevate policy and advocacy issues that are important to the self-determination of Indigenous peoples and tribal nations. In 2021, she was appointed by President Biden to serve on the inaugural White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And Jade was named a grist fixer in 2022 and is a fellow in the Ripe for Creative Disruption, an environmental justice movement fellowship. I've had the pleasure of knowing Jade for quite a while and organizing alongside her in our home state of New Mexico. And I'm so happy to see you, my friend. Thank you for dreaming up this event and making it happen and being here with us today. Hi, Jade.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lena.
Thank you. Next, we have Nikki Cooley, also of the Dene Nation, who resides in Northern Arizona. Nikki serves in a dual role with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals as a co-manager of the Tribes and Climate Change Program and co-director of ITEP, whose goal is to strengthen tribal capacity and sovereignty in environmental and natural resource management through culturally relevant education, research, partnerships, and policy-based services. She works across the continental US and Alaska on outreach and trainings related to climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resilience planning with tribal and Indigenous partners to assist tribal nations in addressing and preparing for climate change impacts. ITEP works in partnership with various federal nonprofit, academic, and community entities. She serves as an author on the human health chapter of the upcoming 5th National Climate Assessment. Nikki, it's an honor to have you here with us. Nice to see you today.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here with everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful. We also have my colleague, Rachel Patterson, our Deputy National Policy Director at Evergreen, who's worked on policy in the areas of climate, energy, clean transportation, and environmental justice for many years. Prior to joining Evergreen, Rachel was at Environmental Advocates of New York, where she supported policy development, analysis, and research, and engaged with state legislators and coalitions. Rachel also served as an Excelsior Fellow for the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, and briefly as the senior briefer for the office of Governor Andrew Cuomo. Rachel is currently pursuing a JD at Albany Law School and has served as an adjunct faculty member at Columbia. And it always blows me away how much you do, Rachel. I don't know how you get all the things on your plate done. You are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel. Hi.
Thanks. Happy to be here. And originally I'm from San Diego, which is the land of the Kumeyaay people, but today I'm up here in Portland on Chinook land. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. We are also expecting Wizipan Garriott, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at the U.S. Department of the Interior, who will be joining us momentarily. But we know we've got a lot of interested folks already on the call, so we're going to go ahead and get started. A little bit of housekeeping quickly. We're going to spend the first 30 to 35 minutes of the call talking about key programs within the Inflation Reduction Act that can benefit tribes and tribal communities. And then we want to make sure to answer questions from you all. So in the meantime, if you have questions, again, we want this to be as useful and informative to the audience as possible. So go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do everything we can to get those questions answered. We'll also be sharing resources in the chat as we go. And this will all be recorded and shared afterwards, so you can go back and look at things as well. So let's go ahead and dive into the details of things. First things first, just a little bit of grounding us in context. Of course, last year, in August of 2022, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the final iteration of what had originally been Build Back Better. Came several different versions of that bill and passed in August as the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, as you'll hear us refer to it throughout the program today. So that bill invests about $400 billion or more in climate action. And it's the single biggest investment, biggest action that the United States has ever taken to address the climate crisis. And really important about that bill, first and foremost, it came about because communities and advocates across the country, like many of you I'm sure on this call, pushed hard for it. That would not have happened without the engagement of folks from across the country. And second, that bill specifically dedicates much of the resources in it to go to historically disadvantaged communities or communities who have not had access to federal resources. So today we are going to talk about how some of the monies in this bill are dedicated specifically for tribal governments to apply for, and how even more programs within that bill than those dedicated just to tribal governments, Indigenous-led community organizations and communities can also apply for and benefit from. So let's go ahead and get into the details of some of that, because we know you all have heard a lot about this background and you want the deets on how we can start getting this money to flow into your hands, hopefully. All right, so Rachel, our resident expert, we are going to talk through 3 key programs today: the Clean Energy Production and Investment Tax Credits, the Environmental and Climate and Justice Block Grant at the end. But first, can we start with the Tribal Electrification Program? This is one of the key programs within the IRA that is dedicated specifically for tribes. Can you share some of the details with us about that one?
Sure thing. First, I'm going to attempt to share my screen though. So if you will bear with me for just 1 second. It may or may not happen though. So if it doesn't, okay, it doesn't look like my screen wants to share right now. Sorry about that, folks. But I'll just walk through at a high level about what this first program is. So the Tribal Electrification Program essentially is going to help tribal homes transition to zero emissions, clean electricity systems. And there's going to be $150 million available until 2031. Essentially, the federal government is going to provide funds to tribal governments for these direct investments in homes. And so the goal is to transition. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. So the goal is to transition homes in particular that lack access to reliable electricity and homes that rely on fossil fuel appliances. So think like your gas stove, for example. And in addition to being able to help.
Let's just give it one moment and see if these slides will load. I want the audience just to know, sorry to interrupt you there. And thank you for scrambling with us as we deal with technical difficulties. I think the slides will load, but I did also want to call folks' attention to the chat where we'll be sharing this information in real time as well in fact sheets that Rachel has put together that have these details as well. Okay, Rachel, I was hoping that the slides would be done after that interjection. They're not. Please proceed. Apologies for the interruption again.
No, all good. How many years are we into online things? And there's always some kind of challenge. So thanks everyone for bearing with me here. But just to get back into it, really the goal is to help transition and electrify homes in tribal communities. And not only can that money be spent on the actual investment in the appliances, but it can also be spent on related and necessary upgrades and retrofits and home repairs to allow for electrification in the first place. And then, as many of you know, that there are some really high quality benefits to electrification. First being that energy costs will be reduced, hopefully more and expected more reliability in energy that's received, and also the health benefits of improved air quality. So we're expecting a notice of funding opportunity to come out sometime this spring. So stay tuned for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And just again, we have program specific fact sheets that we've just put the fact sheet link in the chat for the tribal electrification program. So that has the details on that one. So if you didn't capture it in writing, as Rachel was talking, that's okay. And then we'll share details on the next two coming up, and we can share the slides afterwards so that you can have those details in writing in another way. All right, so Rachel, thank you for talking about the tribal electrification program. Let's get into two more key programs within the IRA. First, the clean energy production and investment tax credit. As folks probably heard, tax credits are a big chunk of this bill, and this is a clean energy tax credit that can really be game changing in making clean energy cheaper. And then we'll talk a little bit about the environmental and climate justice block grants program. Rachel, take it away.
Sure thing. So these tax credits are actually some of the most significant parts of the entire Inflation Reduction Act, and really where we expect to see emissions decreasing over time. So these two credits work really well together. The first one, the investment tax credit, makes it cheaper for businesses and tax-exempt entities like tribal governments and nonprofits to invest in clean energy and clean power systems like solar and wind and even battery storage. And then the production tax credit makes it cheaper to produce clean energy by giving incentives based on how much clean energy is produced. And so these tax credits can really deliver significant emissions reductions and investments in these power systems of the future. And there's a couple other factors here, which are that both of these tax credits include what are called tax adders, which are additional benefits that can be gained on top of the base credit for investing in workers, for example, through apprenticeship and prevailing wage programs, and also through investing in energy communities, which are communities that have historically been harmed by fossil fuel industries. And there's also another exciting part, which is the direct pay and transferability provisions within these tax credits, which allows for tax-exempt entities, again, like tribal governments, nonprofits, states, and municipalities, to be able to take advantage of these credits by getting the upfront value of the credit. So as many people know, with tax credits, you usually have to wait until tax season, and then you have to make the actual investment, and then you get the money back. But with direct pay, tax-exempt organizations and entities will be able to get that direct value from the IRS upfront, which can really help jumpstart these projects. And most exciting, these tax credits have been available since January 1st of this year, and they'll be available in this form for the next 2 years. So folks can start looking into that process and figuring out how to get up to speed on that now. And there is expected to be more guidance coming out from Treasury in the next few weeks about specifically how to do direct pay. And then, Lena, do you want me to just move right on to the block grants?
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that next program.
Great. This next program I'm really excited about. As Lena mentioned, a lot of advocacy went into this one. And this is the environmental and climate justice block grants. And essentially, these programs are designed to get clean energy systems into communities and get pollution out of communities while allowing disadvantaged communities to set their own visions and implement their own visions for community projects. So the funds can be spent in a variety of ways. There's $3 billion for these community-led projects with the goal to target all the funds to disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. And the projects can really be based in anything related to pollution reduction, mitigating climate health risks, expanding climate resiliency and adaptation. You can even spend the funds on workforce development, reducing indoor air pollution. And what I think is one of the most exciting parts about this program is you can literally spend money on improving your relationships with the government. So by creating and fostering deeper connections with local, state, and federal governments, because that will be necessary for disadvantaged communities to really engage in the long run and genuinely see the benefits of these investments rather than getting left behind. So with the EJ Block Grant program, there's three different programs under that currently have applications out. Those applications actually just closed last month, but we do expect that this program is going to have rolling applications with quarterly deadlines over the next 2 years. So 3 years, excuse me. So plenty of opportunity to still apply and get engaged.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. And I hope folks were able to see at least some of those details on your beautiful slides, even though we weren't able to expand them. Thank you all for bearing with us with the technical details there. Appreciate you, Rachel. And again, those details are represented in the fact sheets, and we'll circulate the slides afterwards too. All right, so into the part that folks really want to know about. Nikki is going to talk to us about the actual application process, and big shout out to ITEP for the work that you all have done for a long time, helping tribes get through these application processes and write applications that are successful. So is there anything you want to say specifically about these application processes or resources that folks should be aware of that can help them write successful?
Yes, thank you so much for saying that out loud. I think there's a lot of information that's out there and it's overwhelming. The Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals has been around since 1992 to specifically help tribes build capacity. And lately, one of those things we've been doing is providing technical assistance. I've been with the Institute since 2015, excuse me. And I just want to say that it's monumental to have an administration that acknowledges and supports tribes and their efforts to ensure their culture and land survive, because that's something we've been doing since time immemorial, or since first contact, so to speak. The dedication of federal funds is amazing. And as you mentioned, Lena, the hard part the hard part, but the most interesting aspect of it is the application and the implementation. There are so many, there's so much information out there, it can be very overwhelming. And ITEP likes to serve as one of the one-stop shops where we can either help by partnering or going through what a budget looks like, or who you can partner with. Because we realize there are tribes who don't have the capacity or even the broadband. So I want to mention and make sure that all of us in this virtual room are aware of the barriers that still not only prevents but delays tribes from applying to these funds, because it requires, like I said, broadband. We have to realize that one of the difficult parts of applying is that tribes often are navigating through the different agencies and their application requirements and the different portals and the different timelines. And so what we like to do is either help get that information out there on how to navigate it and answer questions. Just last week, I was on the phone with one of the tribes from the Southeast and going through the Climate Pollution Reduction Act. Simple fact of just talking it over and what goes into it can be a huge deal for tribes. The application, it's a hard question. The applications are different, like I said, for different agencies. So it's really important to attend these types of webinars, but also go through the fact sheets and any of the tools and resources that you all will talk a little bit more about. But through the office hours and maybe one-on-one technical assistance, but also through networking. It's huge. Jade and I were on a webinar on April 26th that ITEP, NDN Collective, and representatives from the EPA, Office of Air and Radiation, partnered on this webinar where we had and featured not only Indian Collective's tools, but we also featured a tribe from the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe who had written a carbon neutral plan. That's a big tool in itself right there, Lena, right there, Lena, because it shows what tribes have done and we can take advice and lessons learned. And most often those tribes are willing to talk about how they applied and what worked and what didn't work. So, and in closing out, Lena, I just want to mention that there are a lot, there's so much help out there, and how to navigate that is also a difficult part for tribes who don't have the capacity, but also it can be overwhelming. So I want to point people to the Inflation Reduction Act Tribal Guidebook. That's a pretty good one if you want to do some light reading. There's also environmental finance centers. There's 29 of them across the country that can help communities access federal funding for infrastructure, public health, environmental protection projects. Also, each region, there's the Environmental Justice Thriving Technical Assistance Centers. People refer to it as EJ Tic Tacs. There's 17 that were funded all across the nation. 14 of them are regional, and some regions have 2. Like for Region 9, I know there's 2 technical centers that will be there, and there's 3 national ones, including one that's headed up by the National Indian Health Board. And ITEP, we're so fortunate to be part of the team for Region 8 and Region 9. These are EPA Region 8 and Region 9. And lastly, each community, each region has these tribal climate resilience liaisons and regional coordinators that are available to help and provide this type of assistance for applying to grants in each region. And I do want to mention that there's tribal organizations, not only like ITEP, but like, for example, the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians that can also help navigate it. There are resources in your communities to help. Just seek us out. We can either help or redirect you in the right direction. So, Lena, with that, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Nikki, and thanks so much for mentioning those EPA technical assistance centers too, which I know EPA has been asking folks like us to help get the info out about those centers because they are having a hard time reaching folks. But those really are places meant to help communities and tribal leaders walk through the application process and just write a more successful application. I was excited to see that pretty diverse group of entities that received the grant to become those centers, and see New Mexico State University on there too, at least one in New Mexico. I was happy to see that. So that's great. And we will put that link to the site for those in the chat. I saw that question come through too. So thank you, Nikki. Okay, great. Let's go to Jade. Jade, I know I have been so impressed with how hard you've been pounding the pavement, talking to so many folks about the Inflation Reduction Act and what it is and what it means and why people should care and how to get involved. Thank you for all of your incredible work and using your platform like you do. Why is it important for folks to engage with these funding programs, and how do you see their potential to shift power and repair past harms?
Thank you, Lena, and hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. So yeah, I really appreciate this question because I think it's my job as well as I think really all of our jobs, especially those who are curious about these grants, to really talk about the narrative of this moment. And it's objectively a really huge moment for our communities, for our EJ, environmental justice, and climate justice movement ancestors, to see, the fruits of their labor really come to fruition. And so, here at Indian Collective, we have 3 tenets that really drive our work and are at the core of our mission. And those tenets, as some of you may have seen in our website or in our materials, those tenets are defend, develop, and decolonize. And I think a lot of people see NDN Collective's involvement in the outreach and the engagement of the Inflation Reduction Act. And they might think, well, NDN is really kind of radical, and they have land back over here, and they have active campaigns that are holding the government accountable or are in direct opposition to something that the feds are doing. So why are they being so promotional about this federal policy, right? And it really comes back to those 3 tenets. So with these funding opportunities, there is opportunity to defend our people, our communities, and nations against climate impacts such as heat waves, drought, flooding, and wildfire by investing in updated infrastructure that's not only climate resilient or climate adaptive, but is really informed by our science and our knowledge and our culture. Next, there is opportunity to develop our communities in a regenerative and sustainable manner that's based on our values and connection to land, culture, and identity. And we can also develop our tribes and our communities' capacities for moving resources. And as you all know, that is one of the strongest areas of NDN's work. And just to plug, as of this year, NDN became the largest Indigenous-led fund in history in the US, moving over $30 million to over 600 tribes and Indigenous communities and territories. And lastly, we can decolonize. And I know you might be asking, as I say this, how do we decolonize something as bureaucratic as federal grants? Well, in many ways, this opportunity is not only about addressing the climate crisis and preparing our communities for current and future impacts, but it's also about, as you mentioned, Lena, repairing the harm that has been caused by infrastructure in the past. And tribes and Indigenous communities know those burdens very well. So the IRA investment is the largest investment into infrastructure since the building of the American highway system. And so with this historic investment, we have a chance to change what's hurt and what's overburdened our communities. Even, as Rachel was pointing out earlier, there's even dollars to repair the relationship with the federal government and restore or even just begin to build trust again. And that really is, in my opinion, transformative justice in action. And then lastly, there is also, and you mentioned this in your question, this is also about shifting power. As I said, our movement ancestors are environmental justice leaders who have passed on, and those who are still with us have fought long and hard to get these resources into our communities. And not just to receive dollars just cause, but because, not just to get dollars just because, but to change the processes and systems so that equity is at the center of how these types of grants and dollars move into our communities. And when we change that, we change the system for years and years to come and decolonize the barriers that have been built to keep us shut out of these opportunities in the past. So not only are we, being promotional and trying to get the word out about all of these funding opportunities for tribes and Indigenous communities, but we're also engaged in the advocacy piece of this work. So since November of last year, we've been showing up at different opportunities to give public comment and write letters so that the accessibility is just that much greater for you all, for tribes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jade. I couldn't agree more, and I'm so glad you touched on shifting power. I just want to chime in and offer that I and we at Evergreen very much see this bill as a first step, and that so much of its potential is really bound up in us organizing around it to use these funds to shift power so that we can push on systems change in a way that increases access, that folks have more of a seat at the table to help design the next piece of legislation and go back and get something bigger. And I think there is just a need even for our communities to be talking about that political power building component of this legislation, in addition to the very tangible, real benefits that these funds can bring to people's lives. So thank you so much for that, Jade. I really appreciate it. And Nikki, I saw that you put one more resource in the chat too, that perhaps I just want to give you space to call that out into the room if you want to. Another network of organizations, it looks like, that can help folks with their application process as well.
Yes, that is in the chat box. I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention the what is it called? The Federal Interagency Thriving Communities Network. And they're also regional as well. So there's another network of folks that are there to help you out. And I believe like Department of Transportation and Defense, I believe Defense is part of that. So I didn't even know about that until a few weeks ago. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I did put the link in there. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, and we will be capturing all these links, and we can send them around afterwards too to participants. And I'm remembering at this point, before we go to questions from the audience, and we've already got a bunch of great questions here, I am supposed to remind folks that you can also sign up for more information and to stay in touch with us in a couple of ways. You can go to our website, evergreenaction.com. Oh, it did look like we could see that pretty well. So Jessica, if you want to put that slide back up, that was coming through pretty clearly. evergreenaction.com/tribes has the fact sheets and a way to sign up to stay in touch with us for more information on these programs. And we will be creating more materials and sending updates about key dates, etc. Second, you can also text IRA for tribes to 50302. So if you take out your phone, you can do that right now and get signed up with Indian Collective, this awesome network that Jade has built to get real-time updates on these programs from Indian Collective about, Jade's been doing an awesome job. Hey, this program has a funding deadline coming up. Make sure you get your application in. So text IRA for tribes to 50302. You get those from Indian Collective, and then sign up for email programs about the Inflation Reduction Act at that link above. All right, so with that information, and again, apologies for the technical details, technical difficulties there. We want to get these details into your hands. Thanks for everyone hanging with us. We've got lots of folks on the line, a lot of great questions. I want to go to this one first because the environmental justice and climate block grants is such a cool program. I remember when the Inflation Reduction Act was first passing, like going into the text of the legislation and reading about this program, $3 billion for the EPA to hand out to community-led organizations, nonprofits, to really do environmental justice work in the way that the community sees fit. This question is really in line with that. So for the environmental and climate justice block grants, it includes funding for improving engagement with federal partners. Cool, that sounds pretty broad. Could money be used for travel, for example, a tribe or a group that wants to meet in person in DC with EPA staff and be able to see them face to face? Do we think funds from this program could be used for something like that? Rachel or anyone want to jump in and answer that one?
Nikki, you might have more experience with this than I do, so I'm happy to have you start if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I do. I think that's something that tribes should definitely write that into their proposal. I always say the question not asked is the one that we'll never know the answer to. So I would actually encourage that. I mean, that's specifically what that is for. So write it in. Don't shy away from it. So yes.
Yeah, I would also say anything that hasn't been ruled out, you should try it. Make the most comprehensive application you can so that even if they say no to one thing, you can get funded for another thing.
Yeah, I didn't see anything that said this couldn't be done when I was sifting through that information. So go for it.
Yeah, and I know we've been engaging directly with the agencies too, encouraging them to be pretty broad in their interpretation of the statute. But the fact that the statute includes things, I believe, like capacity building, something like that, is exactly what this is intended for. Like the spirit of the law in many ways wants to increase accessibility and help communities engage with federal decision makers, with federal processes like this. So would say absolutely build that in, and it could help. You could write in funds to do that in your community too, to host a meeting, to pay for food and travel in a certain region in your community, and then invite an EPA person to come to you too. That kind of thing, I think, is very much in line with the spirit of the program. Okay, Nikki, did you want to get in again?
Can I add one more thing? To add on to what you were saying, Lena, there are these regional tribal operation committee meetings that happen as well, where EPA staff attend from those regions. And that's also a good opportunity to write that into your proposal, to attend those meetings where you can have face-to-face meetings with them. I know sometimes they have specific meetings where EPA staff meet with the tribes. And sometimes people from other regions attend, but it's usually just for the tribes themselves. So EPA has these regional meetings happening all the time, as well as I'm putting the plug in for the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, who have the National Tribal Forum on Air Quality, which just happened, the Tribal Lands and Environment Forum. Those are, and also the Information Exchange Network. We have EPA officials, project officers that attend those meetings as well. So it's a really good time to engage. So I would encourage tribes to put that into their proposals as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. All right, here's another interesting question from Valeria Volchovici. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, but thank you so much for the question. How will IRA and IIJA, that's the other big bill that passed, sometimes called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, how will those two bills help tribes become truly energy independent? Is it just a matter of funding, or does this need to be paired with regulatory reform? Interesting question. So how can this help tribes become energy independent? Anybody want to jump in on that one? Rachel?
I have thoughts, but I'm happy for Jade or Nikki to start first. If y'all have, okay. So always both. Funds are only ever half of the battle here. So the funds are really important. They allow us to invest in community-owned solutions, potentially, really for the first time ever, for a lot of disadvantaged communities. But as this question gets at, there are some really serious regulatory constraints. There are some states, for example, that they only allow 1% community solar per year based on state statute. We are going to need to overcome some of those hurdles, but some of this funding can be spent on it, right? So for example, with the EJ Block grant, the only thing that you really can't do is directly lobby people. But you can use those funds to create better relationships so that you can be in the room to have a say in these regulatory decisions. There's other programs that we didn't talk about today, but that we at Evergreen have information on, and I'm sure Jade has information on as well. For example, the climate pollution reduction grants, which tribes are eligible for as well. That specifically allows money for states and municipalities and tribal governments to be able to get at some of these regulatory issues, because it's recognized within, within the bill that regulatory reform is necessary. So I definitely would say, like, once you get the funds, that doesn't mean, unfortunately, that doesn't mean you can stop the fight for the policies around that, but it does help us get a step closer with that physical infrastructure. And like I said, the goal, I think, would be for the infrastructure to be community owned to the greatest extent possible, which a combination of these programs can really help do. So sorry if that wasn't the most uplifting, but we're going to need to keep doing both for a little while.
I think folks here are really excited to talk about both energy independence and regulatory reform. So you're right on the money. But go ahead, Nikki.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And to add on to what you're saying is that this investment, that's just it, investing in communities that have always been left out. We have always been set aside. We've been our land, we've been relocated to lands that were not familiar to us, and we've made the best of it. And so finally, we've been talking and dreaming about the need for the federal government to honor their trust responsibilities to Indigenous nations. It's here, it's finally come. But that's just the first step of it. The long-term investment in our communities is so important. And other communities, if you think about it, non-Indigenous ones, have been invested, have been getting money for a long time, whereas tribes have always been swept under the rug of being under a state. So sovereignty, the recognition of the sovereignty of Indigenous people comes from the acknowledgement that we govern ourselves and that we have a unique set of laws, regulations, and ways of doing and living that are very much different from non-Indigenous communities. So I just want everybody to really think about what the IRA, the IIJA funds really does mean for us. And I just want to also recognize that this administration has done that. The Obama and Biden administration did start it, but the Biden and Harris administration are going up a step further. You have someone here on this panel who's part of the environmental justice team, but also we also claim her as our auntie, Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, as sitting at the top seat as a cabinet member of an institution that was meant to really eradicate our people. So please understand that this is just not a matter of handing out funding. It's really investing in the long-term efforts that have been ongoing since first contact. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Fabulous points. Jade, is there anything you want to say either about the WEJAC or Secretary Haaland? I know you also worked really hard to help get her in that spot, which I hope I'm allowed to talk about, but I think folks know that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think we're just seeing a lot of momentum here, just not only with the various grants that are coming online that, not only tribes are eligible for. I want to underscore that piece. That is something that NDN has been really vocal about since before we even knew this policy was going to be named the Inflation Reduction Act. If folks recall, a year ago and more than that, we knew this policy was coming down the, and I apologize for the bad metaphor, but coming down the pipeline. And one of our biggest stances was that these funds need to be available not just for tribes, but for Indigenous communities and Indigenous led organizations. So we continue to advocate for that. We continue to also, uplift Native CDFIs, which there are hundreds of in the US now. And so those partnerships or, making grants available to those types of entities, I think are critical for making sure implementation happens in a very just, equitable way. Because, at the end of the day, our tribes are good at some things, and our Indigenous-led organizations are really good at other things too, and have direct trusting relationships with community. So we really want to continue being vocal about that, and just appreciate any support in that type of messaging from folks as you speak about these opportunities online or to your community. I think also just really encouraging people to maximize engagement. People like myself, Nikki, Evergreen team, we're kind of in the weeds doing the advocacy piece, but the more and more tribes can get involved in that, the better, because honestly, your voices as tribes have a lot more weight. I mean, you are nations. And as Nikki has pointed out, there's that nation to nation responsibility and accountability. So I would love to see, and please reach out to me if folks need support around, navigating those RFI, those request for information moments, where tribes can then submit comments or feedback around how a grant is being designed, and who, they're figuring out who's eligible and what projects are eligible. So again, just uplifting the tool that we mentioned in the chat. That's a great place to hear when an RFI comes online, and how to give feedback and input, and then how to work with us, how to work with a group like NDN around crafting comments and feedback.
Thank you so much, Jade. And just a reminder to sign up for that alert network that the Indian Collective runs. That's texting IRA for tribes to 50302. And this is a good segue into one question we got about going forward: is Evergreen or Indian Collective or ITEP a good resource for asking questions about IRA and funding availability? Yes. We want to do the best we can to answer questions that come in on this front. If we can't answer it, we like to play the connector role and try and get you connected to folks who can answer it. Jade and Nikki, I'll leave it to you to share the best way you want to on contact information, but Evergreen, feel free to reach out. We have a contact on our website, and we can put that in the chat too. And that's an inbox that we monitor regularly, and we do want to be an ongoing resource here, as well as create materials that are useful for folks going forward. Let's see, we're almost at the top of the hour here, and we're so sorry that Deputy Assistant Secretary Garriott wasn't able to join us. He was called away to something else, but we will send materials around afterwards. This was recorded too, if you didn't catch everything. One final question on the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants, or EJ Block Grants, as you'll often hear them referred to. Folks just were curious again about who specifically is eligible for that $3 billion grant program. And that's a really good one, because I love to emphasize where it's not just tribal governments or official government entities that are eligible, but others as well, nonprofits, et cetera. Anyone want to walk through who is eligible specifically for that program? Maybe Rachel?
Yeah, happy to. So the statutory text says that community-based nonprofit organizations are eligible, but community-based organizations, or CBOs, can also partner with tribal governments or a local government or a higher education institution or a combination of all of those to get the funds. And I saw someone also had a question about, so are tribal nonprofit associations eligible? The thing is, EPA made the definition of CBOs actually really broad. So I don't know like what the founding document of your organization is, but really the goal is to extend it broadly. And even the definition of what a community is quite broad. So with the goal of kind of capturing as many nonprofits as possible. So it's very likely that your organization would qualify. Oh, and nonprofits can also partner with each other. So there can be more than one nonprofit organization as long as there's an identified lead as well. Stronger applications include, the more the merrier kind of sentiment there.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point on that one, that nonprofits, like small, locally based nonprofit organizations, advocacy organizations, can apply and are eligible for those monies, and really it's meant for you. One thing I did want to just offer, in recognition that at the same time that the administration really is trying to shift things here and to get funds to communities that need them first, bureaucracy is slow, and like the application process can still seem really daunting. Like Nikki talked about, there are a lot of hurdles. Like I went in myself to see what it was like to try and get into that EJ Block Grant portal, and you have to create profiles on multiple different platforms. There are deadlines that come up. You have to do things like provide financials. So I want to be transparent that like if you go in and click on it, it can seem overwhelming. And yet the intention is to get these funds to groups like yours, to tribes, and Nikki, Jade, Rachel, and myself really want to be offering up our organizational resources to help navigate those processes that can feel overwhelming. You all are professionals and have probably done these applications way more times than I have. I just want to be real that they can seem daunting. And the whole point of today is we are in this together. We want to persevere in this together to get resources to communities that need them. And there are resources to help you walk through those processes. Jade, I see your hand.
Yeah, to that point, I think I would just like to share if folks have feedback on, these portals, if you're already experiencing challenges, and just overall feedback around how, if you're, coming from a tribe, if you've not been engaged at all by an agency, or if you think the engagement or outreach from EPA or another agency could be stronger and have recommendations, please send those recommendations our way. We don't want to speak for you or on behalf of you, but with you, and I'd be happy to follow up after this webinar and find a way that we can strategize together around getting that feedback to these agencies, because they need to hear it. And we have how many more months of grants rolling out, the rest of the year at least, and maybe more. So there's still time to give your feedback. And I just want to say that it's really valuable, and we're lucky in many ways that this administration wants to make these grants accessible as possible. And so let's take advantage of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jade. Really appreciate that, and for your service on the White House Environmental Justice Council. I know you do a lot of listening and hearing from folks and trying to lift that up to really powerful entities. So thank you for being that access point, and for the work of the WEJAC. We are almost at the top of the hour. We have a couple more questions coming in about sharing these resources and recordings of the webinar today. It was recorded. We will be housing it on our Evergreen's YouTube channel. We can put the link in the chat now, but we will house that on our website as well. So check out evergreenaction.com/tribes, and you can see the recording. We'll be sharing the resources there. Oh, and there's the link to the recording there. And I think on Jade's amazing words, we will go ahead and wrap it there and give folks a few minutes to catch their breath before their next exciting event, probably today. So thank you so much to my incredible panel of badass leaders. I have to say, this was so wonderful to be amongst such experts and dedicated servants fighting to make the world a better place. Thank you all for your work, for joining us today, and we hope to stay in touch. We will talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.